The rumble of engines broke the quiet morning on my ranch. At first, I thought it was delivery trucks, but then I saw them 4 men in black shirts, marked HOA police, rolling onto my property like they owned it. They weren't real cops, yet they acted like an invading force, barking orders and pointing to my land as if it already belonged to them. Neighbors watched from a distance, some nodding in approval, others staying silent. What they didn't know was that this ranch wasn't just dirt, and wood to M&T was sacred. And I wasn't just any homeowner. I was a former Navy SEAL, trained for moments exactly like this. Life on the ranch had always been my escape from the noise of the world. After years of service as a Navy SEAL, I wanted nothing more than peace, open skies, and the steady rhythm of working the land. The ranch wasn't just property, it was a piece of history passed down through my family. A place where every fence post and every acre carried memories of hard work and resilience. But when the Homeowners Association expanded its reach into the outskirts, peace became harder to find. At first, it was small annoyances letters, demanding I paint my barn. Complaints about the size of my flagpole, or notes about unauthorized livestock. It didn't take long before I realized these weren't just rules, they were weapons. And the target wasn't just me. Families who looked different, spoke differently, or didn't fit the HOA's idea of acceptable, found themselves fined, harassed. And cornered, the message was clear. If you didn't match their picture-perfect version of the neighborhood, you didn't belong. My ranch, with its history and its freedom, was a symbol they didn't want standing in their carefully controlled community. I had brushed off their threats for months, relying on patience and calm. But the hostility escalated. Patrols in marked trucks slowed down outside my gates. Drones buzzed overhead, capturing footage. And then came the rumors that they were forming their own enforcement squad, a group of men who called themselves the HOA police. The morning they rolled up my driveway wasn't random. It was a test. They believed they could intimidate me into surrendering my land, that I'd fold under the weight of their fake authority. But they had no idea who they were dealing with, the kind of man this ranch had built me to be. The 4 trucks stopped just beyond my front gate, dust rising behind them. The men who stepped out weren't strangers. I had seen them at community meetings, loud voices, smug grins, the kind who spoke as if they owned everyone's land. Now they wore matching black shirts stenciled with HOA police in bold letters, tactical belts strapped around their waists. To anyone passing by, it might have looked official. To me, it looked like a bad disguise for something far uglier. One of them barked orders, demanding the gates be opened. He waved a clipboard as if it were a warrant, shouting that I was in violation of neighborhood codes and authorized fencing livestock regulations, even claims that my barn lowered property value. I almost laughed at the absurdity, but the hostility in their voices erased any hint of humor. This wasn't about rules, it was about control. Behind them, I noticed the audience gathering. Neighbors lingered at the edge of the road, phones raised to capture the scene. Some smirked as if they were about to witness a takedown, while others stood silent, eyes averted, unwilling to challenge the spectacle. That silence cut deeper than the insults, the quiet approval of injustice wrapped in apathy. I stayed at the top of my driveway, arms crossed, watching. My years in service had taught me to assess before acting. I studied the way their hands hovered near batons, the twitch of nerves in their postures. They weren't trained, but they were dangerous in their recklessness. They announced they were here to conduct a raid. The words rolled off their tongues with false authority, meant to humiliate and intimidate. They pointed to my stables, my home, even my flag, insisting they had power to confiscate and fine. It wasn't law, they were enforcing it, was prejudice, dressed up in rules. My presence, my independence, the history of my family's ranchette was all a threat to their manufactured order. The crowd leaned in, whispers turning into murmurs. Phones zoomed in. They wanted a show. They wanted me dragged across my own land, powerless under the weight of their fabricated authority. But power is a fragile thing when built on lies. I felt the familiar calm of training settle over me, the stillness that comes before action. I knew their game, and I knew exactly how it ended. They believed they were about to break me. What they didn't realize was that they had already crossed into a battle they could never win. The moment they unlatched my gate without permission, their bluff became a crime. Boots crunched on my gravel driveway as they advanced in formation, one of them swinging a baton loosely in his hand, another gripping plastic handcuffs like a prize he was eager to use. They thought intimidation would be enough. They thought a show of force would make me crumble, but intimidation doesn't. Work on someone who has spent years facing real threats in combat zones. My pulse didn't race, it slowed, steady as a drumbeat. Every detail sharpened. The angle of their approach, the weight shifting in their stances, the fear they tried to mask behind arrogance. I stepped forward, my shadow cutting across the driveway. My voice carried, calm but commanding, the kind that had steadied teams under fire. I reminded them that trespassing, impersonating officers, and attempting unlawful seizure of property were felonies. Their expressions faltered, but they pushed forward, shouting louder as if volume could replace authority. That was when I revealed the truth. My military ID and documentation came out, held high for every camera and every neighbor to see. Former Navy SEAL wasn't just a title, it was a warning carved from years of training, discipline, and survival. The crowd's murmurs shifted instantly. The smugness drained from the men's faces. They had expected a simple target. Instead, they were standing on the property of someone trained to fight, someone who had faced enemies far more dangerous than them and survived. For a heartbeat, the standoff held me standing calm, them frozen mid-step, the crowd silent. And then the fear broke through. The leader's baton dropped to the gravel with a hollow thud, followed by the plastic cuffs slipping from another's hand. Their bluff collapsed in front of everyone. The raid they promised had ended before it began. The so-called HOA police backed away, their confidence shattered, their uniforms now nothing more than costumes in the eyes of everyone watching. Neighbors who had once stayed silent stepped closer to my fence line, some with phones recording, others whispering in disbelief. For the first time, the truth was undeniable. These men weren't guardians of the community. They were aggressors, using fear to enforce prejudice by the time real law enforcement arrived, officers with badges, training, and legal authority. The HOA's fake enforcers were scrambling to explain themselves. Their story unraveled quickly. False impersonation, trespassing, harassment, and attempted illegal seizure stacked up like a list of charges waiting to crush them. My documentation, my service record, and the footage from neighbors left no room for escape. But this wasn't just about me, or even about my ranch. It was about a pattern: how power can be twisted, how racism and entitlement often hide behind official-sounding titles and petty rules. What they tried to do to me, they had already done to others in quieter ways. Families with less visibility, people with fewer resources, had faced fines, threats, and pressure until they gave up their homes. My standoff didn't just expose their actions, it tore the mask off the system they had built. In the weeks that followed, the HOA board fractured. Investigations dug into finances, harassment claims surfaced, and those who once held clipboards and wrote threats now faced the law they pretended to uphold. The neighborhood began to breathe again, slowly healing from years of fear. Standing on my porch at sunset, I looked across the fields and thought about the cost of silence. If I hadn't stood firm, if I had bowed to intimidation, the cycle would have continued. And so I ask you, how many times in history has injustice survived simply because good people stayed quiet? What would happen if we all refused to bow to false authority? Because sometimes the most powerful weapon you can carry is the courage to stand your ground.